Hello and welcome to this video. This is an update on my project Free Peoples or Free Guild um, Army, and this is one of my current painting projects that I'm working on. And it's really a change in army list and painting scheme. I first made the video in end of 2016, and since then, in 2017, the Free Peoples have gotten some new rules and some new point adjustments. That doesn't necessarily render my old army list obsolete, but I just figured I'd relook at it and make a couple changes to make it maybe it's a little bit more interesting for me. And I did start painting um, a unit of Spearmen for the Free Guild last year, but it just wasn't working for me. I don't have a problem necessarily with the colors, but I seem to run into some of the problems I did with my Slanesh demons, where you're painting kind of an off-white, and that's always a difficult kind of color to do, and rather time-consuming. And I just kind of figured that I would do something a little bit different, and that was a motivating decision to change those details. So I hope to get some painting this week, and I'm going to start working on the new project. So I wanted to make an unusual Free People's Army that breaks with the traditional emphasis on infantry. And in my previous army list, I had about 12 demigryphs, and I wanted to make a very thematic army that has likely not been previously played. So the list that I'm proposing does not use a battalion, and it's rather simple because it only uses 2 war scrolls, but I think it has an interesting aesthetic, namely mounted griffins. And again, this is a different type of Free People's Army list and army that at least that I've never seen. And I'd like to just move away. I certainly made a couple other lists in recent months that were more ranged lists, more geared towards handgunners, which I really like. And those are really cool. And if I come back to the Free Peoples at some point, which I really hope to do in the future, I'll probably pursue a different type of army list. But for the purposes of what I really want to do now, I think it's just working on a very offensive, fast army that's just purely mounted griffins, which I think is an interesting take on the Free Peoples. So I do fully intend on painting the other Free People's models that I have, the ones that I bought for the previous list. And you'll be seeing some updates as that as that project continues. So with the General's Handbook 2017, the Free Peoples had their own little portion, their own additional rules, which is a good sign that at least the army will be around for a while. Although, I suspect that if and when they actually get a full-fledged battle tome, they will come out with some new releases and maybe a new look to the army. But for the purposes of continuing as it is, I'm pretty happy with how the new rules work. So this proposed army will still have as a battle trait the Defiant Avengers, which is basically the exact same battle trait as Order. So it allows you to reroll all battle shock tests for all friendly Free People units in the battle shock phase. This army, of course, will be Legion's Free Peoples. And then there are obviously the other major battle trait that you can get is the Free Guild Great Companies. This is the infantry-based trait, similar to how the regiments used to work in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, where one unit of infantry can support another unit of infantry. So they kind of work in tandem, where if you charge the melee unit, maybe the ranged unit of handgunners gets a free round of shooting, or the other melee unit gets to charge in, or something like that. So there are some kind of interesting options there. And if I make a different list at some point, I would definitely exploit that. But again, I'm really focusing on armored and mounted griffins, so that will not be part of this army list. So looking at the command traits for the Free Peoples, there's some interesting options. I suspect I'll either go with Indomitable. And that allows you to add 1 to the save rolls for friendly Free Peoples units within 6 inches of the general, as long as they have not made a charge move in the same turn. It's a little bit more defensive. I think the army list that I would like to craft is a far more offensive-based army, but it's certainly far from a one-drop army list, and there's no guarantee I would be able to go first or get the charge. So, it always has an option, and that does have an impact on the general himself, which in my army list might be really good. It would obviously increase the armor save, which is a really good option, especially since the general I'll be using is pretty resilient to begin with. But I'm not really sure if it's that applicable. I mean, if I can add 1 to the armor save on other Gryphons, as you'll see in the list, that could be good. But 6-inch bubble is not very large, and I know that there's some contention about future rules about models being completely within 6 inches, and that would be impossible for those large monsters. But so I'm not really sure if I either use that or a Grim Resolve. Grim Resolve simply adds 1 to the general's wound characteristic. It's a simple command trait, but the general is already very resilient, and I like kind of stacking that a little bit more. So that could be a potential use. And then for the Free People's artifacts, again, there are 6 choices, and I think the one that really stands out for me would be armor of a meteoric iron, for exactly the same reason that I've talked about making the general even more resilient, and that artifact adds 1 to the save rolls. So that makes the general of this army difficult to kill, and I think that's kind of a theme to some extent. The general, as you'll see, he's not a key part of the strategy, but it's nice to have some resilient units hanging around. So I thought I'd look at a couple war scrolls. As I said, I'm only using 2 in this army. So one is the Free Guild General on Gryphon, and the other is the Demigryphs. And I'll just kind of look over them, go over some details, and then I'll talk about the list as it currently stands. So the Free Guild General on Gryphon, it's obviously a monster, and it moves rather quickly at unwounded. It can move 15 inches. It's fairly resilient with a 4+ armor save, 13 wounds, and bravery 7. Now it has several different options for the character on top. The lance, 2-inch range, 3 attacks, 3+ to hit, 4+ to wound, -1 rend, 2 damage. The rune sword, 5 attacks, 3+ to hit, 4+ to wound, -1 rend, 1 damage. And the great hammer, which is 3 attacks, 3+ to hit, 3+ to wound, -2 rend, D3 damage. And you can obviously choose between what you would want, and I'm not really sure. My list has a few of these generals on Gryphons, and so I'm not really sure if I would want to switch up the weapons or not. I'm leaning to some extent towards the lance, for the simple fact that as an ability you have a charging lance that adds 1 to the damage of this model's lance if it charged that turn. So that basically on the charge the lance is doing 3 damage, which is nice. The only other thing that I might consider would be the great hammer, only because of the rend, which could be very valuable. But D3 damage is good, but it's a little bit unpredictable. You can easily roll the 1 as much as the 3. So the charge bonus on the lance, at least initially, seems like a good idea. Now, obviously, the Gryphon can fly, and its attacks are Deadly Beak for 2 attacks, 3+ to hit, 3+ to wound, -2 rend, and it does d6 damage if it's undamaged, down to 1 at 12 wounds. And then the Razor Claws. These are fairly standard kind of monster attacks. If it's undamaged, you get 6 of these attacks at 4+ to hit, 3+ to wound, -1 rend, 2 damage. So, a decent monster profile. Honestly, I think that these monsters are fairly average. It's mostly, I think, they're a fairly efficient point cost. Now, the big thing for me is the fact that although it says a 4+ armor save on the profile, it essentially always has a 3+, because you can always get a free guild shield. And a free guild general with a free guild shield has a save of 3+. And it's one of those strange circumstances where there's no reason to never take a shield, because it says in the description, a free guild general may also carry a free guild shield to protect himself. It doesn't really matter what weapon you choose. You can always also carry a shield. There's no reason not to. I don't know if it's like modeled such that the Great Hammer, the shield's on his back or something. I have no clue why you have those types of options, and then the shield is just kind of a throw on. I could almost understand that the lance and sword have the shield and the Great Hammer doesn't, but that's not the case. You can always take a shield, so it's strange. And the Gryphon has the Piercing Blood Roar ability, which is a good kind of something you might forget easily. But in the Battle Shock phase, the Gryphon can loose a piercing blood roar at an enemy within 8 inches. I think what's important here is it doesn't necessarily need to be something that you're in combat with. If it does, that unit must roll 2 dice and use the highest result if it has to take a Battle Shock, which is nice. So if your opponent is going to take a Battle Shock and there's a potential to lose models, that's actually a pretty decent ability. It's especially good if you've caused Battle Shock on a unit that has multiple wounds, something like ogres or something like that, where losing a single model is a big deal. And now for the command ability, so one of these will be a general, and the Rousing Battle Cry. If a free guild general on Gryphon uses this ability, pick a free people's unit within 15 inches. Until your next hero phase, you can add 2 to the unit's bravery and 1 to its charge rolls and hit rolls. So it's a very offensive ability. And I especially like the +1 to charge rolls, because that can really add on to the demigryphs, as we'll see. So I think that, this is, by no means an amazing monster, an amazing character, but it's efficient, it's resilient at 13 wounds and 3+ armor save. And if you max out the number that you can have, I think it's a pretty intimidating unit, especially since it's pointed fairly well. So the other unit in the army is going to be Demigryph Knights. And yeah, I just love the look of these units and the idea of an all-mounted Gryphon type of army. And again, this is a war scroll that is, I think, undervalued and often overlooked. I think, in general, I think the Free Peoples are just kind of too associated with old Warhammer, the 8th edition, and Warhammer Fantasy Battle, that they're just not often considered compared to the new models and the new armies that have been released since Age of Sigmar. So, but again, these were reduced in points, as were the General on Gryphon in the last General's Handbook. So, they were a relatively decent unit beforehand. But if they're going to reduce the points, all the better. So I actually had 12 of these guys in my last build, and I decided to increase that number. Again, I just like the look of them for that reason alone, and I like building armies that are fun and unique, if nothing else. So, 10-inch move is good. 4 wounds, 4+ armor save, bravery 6. They have lance and sword, 2 attacks, 4+ to hit, 4+ to wound, 1 damage. It's not very impressive whatsoever. And then they can have an option for the halberd. 2 attacks, 4+ to hit, 3+ to wound, 1 damage. So slightly better to wound. And the demigryph itself is really the primary damage dealer. 3 attacks, 4+ to hit, 3+ to wound, -1 rend, 1 damage. So, it's a unit of 3 to 12. The champion gets 1 extra attack with either the lance and sword or the halberd. This is something, the standard bearer is something I overlooked. Someone pointed this out. Now, my initial goal was to have smaller units of 3. But someone pointed out you could easily have units of 6 without worrying too much. And this is probably a decent concept. So if you look at the standard bearer, you only need to take a battle shock test if 2 or more of its models were slain during the turn. And that's not too bad. And if you have the general's command ability on them, then they're actually bravery 8. And they're all hitting on 3s. So that's actually a decent option to choose for the command ability, especially if you have a large unit. So the hornblower model in this unit may be hornblowers. If the unit includes any hornblowers, add 2 to the charge rolls. So you have a +2 modifier to charge. Again, if you have the general's command ability, that's another +1, so you're at +3. The average roll on 2 dice means that you can effectively charge, on average, 10 inches. That's really good. And, a minimum of half that really ensures that you're just not going to have those times when you can't get into combat. So you can effectively move 10 inches and effectively, on average, charge 10 inches. It means that they can move across the board very quickly. So even though they have a 4+ armor save, you can reroll saves of 1 for the unit, which is good. And again, with the charging lance, same as almost as on the general, add 1 to the rune rolls and damage, importantly. So, as I recall with the general in the previous one, again, you get 1 to the hit rolls and the charge rolls. So if you use the command ability on these guys, they have 2 attacks. They're charging at roughly 10 inches, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s with 2 damage each. That's actually a fairly effective unit. And the demigryphs are hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s. And they do have a special bonus there where if you get a 6 or more on a wound roll, you do D3 damage. So again, this is a unit that, by no means is it a powerhouse type of unit, but it can be effective. And it's a unit that you don't see that often or maximized to its potential. So the concept of this army is something that's fast. Demigryphs move 10 inches, and as I've described many times already, they can charge a fairly long distance. The general on Gryphon can move 15 inches if it's undamaged. So this is a very fast, effective army. It's fairly resilient. The general will effectively be at a 2+ armor save with 13 wounds. And the other Gryphons are at 3+ armor save at 13 wounds apiece. And all the demigryphs are at 4+ armor save with rerolling 1s. And because of the charge bonuses of the lances, effectively doing more damage, with the command ability, hitting a little bit more effectively, it can actually hit fairly hard on the charge. I could see myself maybe retreating out of combat and charging with something different. So there's some I think it's just kind of a fun concept that, and simple and fairly unique for that reason. So what I'm thinking of doing, and I should note that I've already ordered all the Gryphons, and I already have all the demigryphs. Um, so one general on Gryphon will be the army general, and then 3 other general on Gryphon. So that maximizes the behemoth slots and the character slots. But again, I think that's a pretty monstrous force to come flying at you. Even if these war scrolls are, average monsters, 260 points, I think they're fairly effective, if only for their resilience. That's a lot of wounds that are 3+ armor save, and if they can dish out really any damage at all, and they should, it should be a kind of an interesting kind of flying cavalry force. And I'm going to support this by no less than 18 demigryphs. 3 units of 6 is what I'm thinking. These are battle line if the army is Free People's Allegiance. And again, I think that's something that would be a spectacle to see. 18 demigryphs and 4 generals on Gryphon. Kind of a unique army that I don't think anyone else is really using. And this is exactly 2,000 points, which is nice. Most of the armies I build are, way off in points, far more than I'm allowed to take. Or, well, I don't think I ever design an army that's underpointed. But in the past, I've always made these fantastical army lists that are like, 800 points over. But this is right on the money. Okay, so I hope to start painting and getting these assembled in March, and I hope to post some update videos on how it's going. And if the army is ever finished, I hope it will be in the near future. And if I play any battle reports, I'll definitely show the army off and such. So there's some update videos for this coming up, and I'm looking forward to building this, and I'm looking forward to working on my updated color scheme. There's still some decisions to be made, but I'm strongly leaning towards a predominantly blue color scheme. If any of you recall my Tomb Kings kind of army list, I might use some of the blue there, or some of the blue on Stormcast Eternals, and use kind of some of the fabric and armor as like a kind of a nice blue. I think it would be a nice contrast to the kind of standard paint scheme for Gryphon. And I also plan on using kind of bright metallics as a contrast. So kind of a blue with, I'll probably use Iron Breaker as a base, but I kind of want to push it up to a kind of a very light metallic. So I'll paint some test models here in the next few weeks, and I'll probably post those in an upcoming update video. So thanks for tuning in, and have a good one.